Well, welcome and thank you for taking the time to look at the recording of the event we held on International Women's Day on March the 8th. I am Julie Verhaar and I'm the moderator of the event you are about to watch. This event is one of a series to celebrate Daryl Upsall International's 20th anniversary, supporting nonprofits worldwide through recruitment and consulting services. So a little bit about myself before it kicks off. I'm a global executive leadership advisor supporting nonprofits in their organizational development and journey to sustainability and transformational change. I have over 20 years experience driving successful business and fundraising operations with Amnesty International, UNICEF, Greenpeace International, and the Netherlands Red Cross. I'm very lucky and feel very privileged to have lived and worked with so many colleagues and organizations from all over the world. And I'm also a proud member of the board of the Dr. Dennis Mukwege Foundation and the Global Survivor Fund. The panel members will now introduce themselves and then the event will start.
Hello everyone, happy International Women's Day. We're so pleased to see all of you. We heard that there was something like almost 800 participants who had signed up to this event, which is fantastic. So we hope it's a joyful one and a really fantastic debate. And I'm so honored to be sharing the platform with Ourania and Dr. Joanne to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities of women in leadership. So my name is Esther Kwaku. I have been in the nonprofit sector for about 20 years, as young as I know I appear. So I've been in the sector for a long time. I also run a social enterprise called the Nerve Network, which helps people, brilliant people in low-income communities to build their own businesses. So it's a pleasure to be here. So I will hand the baton over to Dr. Joanne.
Thank you, Esther, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Joan Nyanyuki, and I'm taking this. I'm joining you from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And just a little bit about myself. I'm a medical doctor by training, who then transitioned into human rights and social justice work, where I have now worked for 15 years, accumulation of 22 years of professional work. And I started, of course, as a medical doctor, but quickly got involved in rehabilitation of torture victims, victims of sexual and gender-based violence, and that just sucked me into the whole world of human rights, where I've been for the last 15 years. And I currently lead the African Child Policy Forum, an African NGO that works to advocate for the rights and well-being of African children. All right, so and now I will pass the baton next to, who's my next colleague? Sorry,
it's me.
Next person. Okay, back to you, yes. Back to you, Rania.
Don't worry. My name is Ourania Dionysiou. I'm the VP of International Philanthropy and Partnerships at the IRC. I'm also the VP of Global Partnerships and Philanthropic Services at the IRC, which stands for the International Rescue Committee. It's an organization headquartered here in New York, where I'm dialing in from. It's very early morning, but hopefully I will be able to be comprehensive with my commentary, much like the rest of my colleagues. It's very thrilling as a woman to be able to speak on the journey of women, both with regards to leadership in our sector, but a bit more generally, as we have many facets to play in our daily lives. I have been always a child of the sector. I'm a former diplomat of my native Cyprus, but have also served in numerous capacities in the UN prior to joining.
So we only have 1 hour. So let me start with the outline of the session, and then I do a few general remarks before we go into the questions, because that's what it's all about. So please start asking some of the questions while we're going along in the session. Be as short and sweet as possible, please. So we'll show them on the screen and have questions specific for a panel member. Please mention that in your question as well. So initially, 2 of our members that were invited, unfortunately, are not with us. One of them is Marieke van Schijf, the Secretary General from the Netherlands Red Cross. She's currently flying back from visiting the border of Poland and Ukraine. So she was there to report directly for the national event that happened in the Netherlands yesterday evening. And I'm happy to note that they raised over 120 million euros for a tiny little country. I think it's pretty good. The other panel member, Reem Abdelhamid, is also not joining us today because of personal reasons. So furthermore, I'd like to make sure that you know this session is being recorded so we can share it with those who are not able to come. So a little bit of background about International Women's Day. As a reminder, we celebrate International Women's Day annually on today, March 8th, to commemorate the cultural, political, social, economic achievements of women. The earliest version was supposedly a Women's Day organized by the Socialist Party of America in New York City in February of 1909. 1909. So then International Women's Day was made a national holiday in 1917 and was subsequently celebrated by the socialist movement in communist countries. The holiday was associated with the far left movement and governments until it was adopted by the global feminist movement in the late 1960s. And International Women's Day became a mainstream global day following the adoption of the United Nations in 1977. So it's been around a long time, and unfortunately, we still live in a society that continues to facilitate disproportionate male success in almost every aspect of life, from politics to business to science, and also in civil society, where the majority of staff are women. We still see that women are not represented equally at the leadership level, and that's what we're talking about. Fair Share is a relatively new initiative that tracks this via a monitor and call out on all social impact organizations to achieve a fair share of women leaders by 2030. So if you don't know them already, please check out the link that will show in the chat because it's really interesting. So the women's route to leadership continues to be more problematic and often more challenging than those experienced by men, regardless of the field in which they seek success. And women's path to professional success also involves additional hurdles created by older social norms, as we are well aware of. Civil society organizations and foundations are key players in the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. Not only gender equality, the famous goal 5 of this agenda, but it is also a condition to achieve the other 16 goals. So imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together we can forge women's equality. Collectively, I believe we can all break the bias, which is the theme of this year's International Women's Day. To do this, we want to celebrate women's achievements and forge positive visibility of women. And I'm therefore really excited to be having this discussion today with exceptional female leaders in our sector and celebrate their achievements and how they got here. So let me start with the first question. And I'll start with this question to Joanne to start off with. And reminder, please put your questions in the chat. So the first question is Joanne, and then after that, Esther and Ourania. Please tell us briefly about yourself and one specific career challenge that you have overcome as a woman in the sector. Joanne.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you really for the chance to be part of this conversation. A little bit more beyond the introduction about myself is having risen through the ranks from a technical position into a leadership position and having had the opportunities to not only lead African organizations, but also teams of international organizations, serve as an advisor to different government institutions and sit as a trustee also on several nonprofits. I have found that oftentimes I'm the only person in the room who looks like me. I'm the only person in the room who sounds like me, and not just sound in terms of accent, but really sound like me in terms of content and the representation of the stakeholders, of the audiences, of the constituents who I represent. So I become then a minority voice and almost like a sole voice in the desert, trying to say certain things that oftentimes might not have been said before or might not be comfortable with everybody else. So that's been a big challenge. And this has been a challenge not only in positions, but also in trying to get into positions. And I just want to share one example, for instance. And Julie, you just spoke about there have been very few women in leadership positions, decision-making positions, and therefore often for senior positions like ours in recruitment panels. So I'll share with you an experience where I had of being recruited and going through about, say, 5 panels, 5 different interviewing panels. And in none of those did I meet a woman, except in the staff panel. And of course, there was a HR assistant who was a woman. But when we then interact as women with panels recruiting us into positions which are all male, and frankly, predominantly 90% white male, that is really a challenge that we have to overcome. And because it sort of makes me think, did I walk into the wrong room? And it's a huge psychological weight to carry. It is a huge psychological weight to bear. Thank you, Julie. Back to you.
Thank you so much. I don't know, it's a massive challenge. So Esther, over to you.
Thanks, Julie. So just a little bit of more of my background. So as I was saying in the beginning, I have quite a long background in the non-profit sector, mostly working in sort of humanitarian international aid, causes, issues, and so on. And my background is as a fundraising storyteller, so working on campaigns, appeals, and so on. I was quite fortunate to be sent to many different places to gather those stories, and so to be able to sit with communities and have really close contact and one-on-one conversations with communities has been just one of the best things actually as part of my career. And then I left the sector about 6 years ago because, quite frankly, I became very disillusioned with some of the things that I was experiencing. For example, these narratives around poverty and aid, and I felt uncomfortable with my role in it at the time. And so I stopped and I wandered and explored for a bit. And just decided to have conversations with different people, in different parts of the world, different tech change makers, and I'm actually still doing that. And so that's what I do through the social enterprise I run, through other ventures. So I'm all about telling stories, but about purpose and authenticity and finding your voice and power. And I love to stir up good conversations and shift the energy. And so to speak to a challenge, actually, I want to build on, because it's interesting that Joanne should mention the soul voice. That has been my experience too. I think my voice is very important. And you know what it's like, especially when you're many things. So, I appear young, I'm Black, I'm a woman. And amongst larger groups of people, I'm much more of a listener than a speaker, actually. So when you're around the table, virtual or otherwise, and you're the only person, and quite often it's the powerful, sometimes often male voices who always jump in with the response first. And, I still witness that today. And there are studies even that talk about how frequently more women are interrupted when they are speaking. So, this happens all the time. So I think by that nature, when I'm in the room, so a challenge that I've had is that when I'm in the room and maybe there are louder voices and I am who I am, that perhaps I have in the past muted myself without meaning to, but I've muted myself. And it's a life's work. I haven't completely overcome it. I'm still working. But some of these challenges, that they are work for us to do and get a little better and a little better and a little better. And I do so by I guess, validating that, I do have something to say, okay? I have something to say and it matters. And also by not pretending to be something that I'm not, and owning what I am and what I'm brilliant at, because, you're the experts of your own life. So that really helps. So, but the voice is definitely a challenge. That's it from me.
Thanks, Esther. And you have an amazing voice, so really happy you're here and to join us in that and show that that is a voice for everyone in this debate. So, Ourania, something specific challenging that you've overcome that you'd like to share?
Sure, thanks so much. It's lovely to be hearing the stories of our fellow panelists. As I mentioned earlier, I was born and raised in Cyprus. It is when we were little and we were in school, they used to tell us it's the third largest island in the Mediterranean, and they were making us feel big, but it's actually a quite small country. And I was perpetually curious and idealistic about getting to know the world and impact the world in whatever way I could. And the first part of my professional journey was purely academic. I was a perpetual learner. I am still a geek in many ways. And I thought that my impact to the world would have been through learning and, of course, studying and sharing. But then soon enough, I discovered that I wanted to do more with myself. And I was privileged enough to be able to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the diplomatic corps. And that's when I began to be aware of a challenge, which I'm sure many women will share, of acquiring roles that were older than me in male-dominated environments. And so in many ways, I feel that, and it's beautiful to be looking back now and sounding like Steve Jobs, connecting the dots as we live forward by doing that backwards. I think that I have spent the biggest part of the first phase of my career shrinking myself in order to fit in order to be better understood, in order to not come across as intimidating, in order to be able to create a space while being in the background. And now I have been privileged enough to have an awakening, both instilled by the privilege of being surrounded by other like-minded women, but also in the trajectory of my professional life to find role models, both male and female, that have actually helped me understand the value add of the authenticity that we all carry as individuals, irrespective of our gender. And what I do feel now is the responsibility to transform that challenge into an opportunity for other women and girls who might actually live through the social norms of those environments where we need to shrink, and actually motivate them, but also encourage them to, much like Esther was saying, acquire and use their voice. And there is beauty in that. There is beauty in differentiated voices. There is beauty in disagreements, and there is beauty in challenge. And in that sense, I think there is a silver lining to the notion of challenge as is.
Thanks, Ourania. This is great. And we need to step up, and this is what we're doing today and sharing so people can learn. So because of my problem in the start, we're running a bit out of time, but so the next question is for Esther and then Joanne and then Ourania. From your own experience, what has been the most important factor that has led you to where you are today? And try to be slightly brief so that we can get to the audience next.
Okay, all right, great. So I would say, I will try, because this is something I've talked a lot about. Verhaar has made a comment about sorority, and this is something that I wanted to talk about. My tribe is everything, and in terms of personally, professionally, I mean the humans that have your back, okay, that shift and evolve as you move on. And it's the co-worker who messages you after a meeting and says, "Are you okay?" Or they may be aware of some challenges that you're going through, or they come and find you. They come and find you and they support you if something isn't quite right. It's that critical friend that says to you, Esther, that was good, but you need to step up your game. You can do better. You've got this. It's all those little, we talk about microaggressions. Most people know what microaggressions are. The opposite of that is microaffirmations. The people that are around you that do not let you fall. They catch you. Not that falling is bad, but that, that have your back. So I would say that my tribe is everything. They are cross-generational, younger, older, inside the sector, outside the sector, bottom, up, top down mentors, and they're a really good collective of people that really help to lift me up, and they're my most valuable asset by far. So I'll stop there. The tribe.
Thanks.
Yes.
And Joanne, what is that for you?
I think the single most important factor is a difficult one really to narrow down, but I think I would say, Julie, it's actually support. But I don't want to speak about support here or now where I sit. And as I was reflecting, I thought it's really support from back in my childhood. And working now with children and working with girls, I see how important it is how we are raised. Being raised by very supportive parents, the most feminist dad that you can imagine, the most go-getting mother that there might be in the world. We all think our mothers are the best anyway. I think that the affirmation, exactly what Esther was talking about, the affirmation being built up, even when you fall, being told, no, you didn't fall, you just tripped, you missed a step, but you didn't fall. Keep going. The constant encouragement at home in the school environment, I think is really the fundamental building ingredient that has got me to where I am. So it instills confidence, belief in self, a sense of my identity. It builds my character to really be somebody who does not break easily and does not shy away from challenges. So it's constantly being able to, and then I think aside from the home environment is then over the course of my journey, getting mentors who then continue to the encouragement flow that had started way back, close to 50 years ago. Thank you, Julie.
Great. Very recognizable, Joanne. And Ourania, for you?
It's very telling because we are three women that have presumably very different stories, very different environments in which we are raised, and we're about to give the exact same answer. So there must be some truth to that, yeah? So my answer is my family, but also the family that I have acquired along the way. So I have lived in 10 different countries over the years, given, of course, the trajectory of my career. And it's a privilege to be able to go back to my biological home, and it's a space that makes me feel safe and understood and doesn't ask questions. And as I now deal, of course, with the plight of refugees, I have learned not to take that for granted. The ability to actually have a home to go back to, which is both physical as well as emotional, but also the family I have acquired along the way, professionally, personally, the tribes of women and girls and men and boys that I have gotten the privilege of getting acquainted to. And there is beauty in building a family away from home because it means that the values you have been bestowed upon at home are values that you actually enrich the world with, and more importantly, get enriched by.
Superb. I fully recognize what you're saying. And it is true, right? When we're all saying the same thing. So thank you for that. And we'd now like to go to some of the questions from the audience. So magically that is going to appear somehow. So from Karen, will flexible remote working have a substantial impact in women's opportunities? I see Ourania nodding. So would you want to take that one?
Of course. I was nodding actually the other way around. I think that one of the things that I have been discussing with my team in the last few days is how good we have become at this. The truth is we have become very used to working remotely. There are some advantages actually to working like this. So for example, think of the inequity of someone that is permanently based somewhere else and feeling left out when we're actually having meetings in the office where we can also organically, socially interact. I think what we need to do as organizations is two things. The first one is listen to the environment around us and read everywhere in business articles where we are being told that in fact this period of time has actually intrigued talent into realizing that they actually want to be working remotely and be responsive to that. So number one is be more flexible with putting the talent at the heart of things, but also recognizing that the female talent has particular characteristics and needs that we need to adhere to, because the average woman that has a baby at home and a husband that is working also in the next room is not able to adhere to the circumstances of working in the same way that we would traditionally be expecting that. But also, number two, it is on us now as organizations to identify ways to make that more visible for every talent to be able to do the work. So I am actually hopeful and optimistic about our ability to create a new way of working, because I don't think we have a choice. I think this is what talent is telling us, and this is what we need to do in order to retain and grow our talent.
Great, thanks. And then another question from the audience, from Ourania. I'm not sure if I mentioned it well, but it would be nice if you could comment about advances into sorority. Perhaps if any of you can provide information about the psychological side of the concept and how come there is so many competitively among women, especially in the professional field. So Joanne, can I hand that one over to you?
Yes, Julie, you may. And I'll start by saying that I'm probably not very familiar or familiar with the word sorority. So I'm going to respond to the second part of the question, and really, which is about women and supporting. For me, it's about women supporting each other and solidarity between women. And I would say it comes in my view that this is really something that needs to happen more, because frankly, I think, first of all, we have to remember that women are competitive. I think oftentimes we think that competition only belongs to men, but human beings by nature, it's almost, a survival instinct to compete and want to get better, improve yourself, whether you compete with yourself or with somebody else. So I don't think competition inherently is a bad thing. I think when competition becomes negative is when I have to trample over you and leave you bloodied out on the ground for me to get ahead. And that is what now we need to be aware about and provide solidarity instead. And to actually appreciate that there's enough space, need, and demand for women to move forward together, to use Esther's word, as a tribe. And so what really needs to happen is shifting of mindset to understand that we complement each other. I will not be able to do everything that everybody else is doing. So if we can simply see that it's about complementing each other, working collaboratively, bringing more people on the table, and competition being positive and not negative, competition that seeks to improve, to bring more people in, then I think competition can be a good and positive thing. But I think just to also pick from and I worked in women's rights before, so I'm quite familiar with the idea of, the feminist idea of solidarity and nothing for us without us, that has also been borrowed from the disability people's rights. I think it's to make sure that in the professional field, we really live and demonstrate these mantras, even at an individual level. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks. Yes. And I think, this is what we're trying to do here. We're in it together. We need to support each other. So I'm going to go to the next question that we have prepared. And that is a question that has come out of a recent report on the UK Chartered Institute of Fundraiser to better understand female leadership gap in fundraising. So what has come out clearly there is that 3/4, so 76% of professional fundraisers in the UK are women. And we see the same pattern is evident in similar countries, including in the US, for example, where 73% of the fundraising workforce is now women. Yet the dominance of women in fundraising ranks is not equally reflected in the leadership positions, fundraising leadership positions or leadership positions. So the report has identified the following key factors that would encourage women into leadership. We've already touched on a couple of those, but let me say the 6 that came out of this report. So 1 is a commitment to flexible working. 2, support of a mentor. 3, a role with trust and responsibility. 4, training opportunities. 5, visible role models for women. And 6, seeing a diverse leadership team. So Esther, to you, do you agree with these recommendations? And what else would you add to the list? based on your experience?
Yes, they are all very helpful things, Julie. Yeah, they are good recommendations. I would just, and this is my perspective, my slight caution with these is that it's just to make sure that they're not all based on what we lack. I think Ourania or Dr. Joan was saying about the skills that we bring to the table and the strengths that we bring to the table. So versus the mindset around women's capabilities, the abilities, power to transform and innovate and be resourceful. So there are a couple of things in there that I would maybe just put a question mark on. I wholly agree with mentorship because that's useful for any gender. Training opportunities, for example, yes, of course, helpful. How about looking at some of the brilliant qualities that we already bring to the table and, utilizing our existing strengths? So I would say it's about recognizing the diversity that we bring as women to the table. And secondly, I think there's a bigger piece around the values and the systems of belief. So, the hashtag, the theme of International Women's Day is break the bias. Okay, it's break the bias. So I wonder whether there's there's a deeper sort of, root exploration that needs to be done around something like feminist leadership principles and bringing values like that or similar into the workplace and into organizational culture. For example, ActionAid International has a set of feminist leadership principles. They include values like self-awareness, self-care and caring for others, dismantling bias, inclusion, sharing power, and get this, and responsible and transparent use of power, okay? Respectful feedback, courage, zero tolerance. I like these set of values developed by ActionAid because it covers all of the things in this report, but actually it's a bit more deep, it's a bit more concrete than that. What does it mean when you share power and it's transparent? What does it mean when you encourage respectful feedback? So if more of these things I think were discussed, then we would maybe see a bit more systemic change or a bit more of a shift in mindset, because I think that's a lot part of the issue as well. So yes, I agree, but I think there's also something a bit below the surface as well.
Yeah, and it's about the power dynamics and shifting the power is critically important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mentioned the Fair Share organization for that link was shared before, but there is a lot of additional information about feminist leadership in there as well, and women talking about it. There are little courses. It's really a fascinating information sharing that we can see there as well. So for people who would like to get more into those values and in feminist leadership questions, because it's sometimes a tricky concept, and it's not about female alone, right? It's about much more than that. So I'm just going to go to one question for Joanne, because we know and research has proved clear evidence over and over again that not only having women and having women of color in prominent roles at companies is good for the bottom line, right? The problem is that to date, organizations have not been promoting women of color to the highest level in their organization. And unfortunately, this is even true, more true, I must say, for Black women. So we also know that many women of color in the nonprofit sector are highly skilled and want to lead. And we have two credible examples here on the panel. So I'd like to ask you, Joanne, in your experience, are there unique challenges or barriers of women candidates coming from the Global South while applying for these senior leadership roles? I mean, you started off with a recruitment example, but maybe you can share some more light on this, because I think this is critically important. Thank you.
Julie, yes, and I want to share a very unique challenge that I have experienced, but I have sort of been on the other side of the challenge. It's the bias towards qualifications and experiences from the South. And when I say qualifications, it's about credentials and even advanced degrees that have been acquired in, for instance, in my case, in African universities or Asian and perhaps in the Central or Southern America. And similarly is experiences that have been acquired in the global South. And so oftentimes when at least, and this is from my experience, when we apply for these positions, it's to find that there is a sort of silent bias. I don't know whether to call it conscious or unconscious. I don't know what promotes it, but there's a sort of thinking of, oh, if your credential is from a Kenyan university, for instance, and I say Kenyan because I'm Kenyan, it's not good enough. And what is really good enough is this, university from the Ivy Leagues and the other European, Western, and Northern universities. And so you find that oftentimes what's happening is there's sort of therefore a filter. And women who are getting in, African women, global South women who are getting into senior global positions have actually had the privilege of going to these Western and Northern universities. And that speaks to me as well. And so I ask myself, what about those women who have not been as privileged as I have to go to a top-ranking university that ranks top 20 or top 50 in the globe? So that's a really unique challenge. And the same thing applies when we apply, for instance, with these multilateral organizations, INGOs, and I have experience of 20 years on the African continent, handling extremely severe and difficult issues. But then the question is, oh, it's not global experience. And when competing against candidates who have experience that's European or American, that's also not global if African is not. And so sometimes I ask myself really deep questions. Is this about where the funds are coming from, that who pays the piper, plays the tune? Is it about political power? Is it the effects of colonialism, which really, as people from the global South and as Africans, we still face? So that's probably the one unique challenge that I'll share for today. But there's others, numerous others. Back to you, Julie.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. And it's bizarre, right? Why one university is better than the other, and that's not the critical point. And people have that bias, and we need to break that bias and talk about it. So I'd like to go to the question from the audience again. So we have a question from Emily. We are discussing shrinking ourselves to fit into male-dominant world, but how can we look at this different approach as a positive? Is it always shrinking, or should we be proud to take a quieter but more thoughtful, leading from behind approach? So, Ourania, do you want to have a go at Emily's question?
Of course, my favorite kind of question. It reminds me of the book Quiet, that talks about the value add of introverts in a world that is predominantly dominated by extroverts. I would argue that we shouldn't be leading from behind. I would argue that you're absolutely right in shifting the gears of the framing of this and going from shrinking to, in fact, enriching perhaps the environment. I absolutely agree with you, Emily, in that we do have differentiated strengths. We do have a different, multifaceted way of looking at the world as women, which I hope is helpful to our male counterparts as well, and vice versa. And I think one of the things that we have all acknowledged is the need to have a little bit of both, because they're complementary in the way that we exist in the world. I would say that I have an issue with the leading from behind approach. I think that in many ways there is a notion of leadership that says that a good leader is the one that watches their team progress and walk, and they're behind to make sure that everybody is walking alongside them. But I hope that we can live in a world where female leadership is celebrated, both in terms of the value add it brings to the table, so leading alongside the male counterparts, but also in terms of its differentiated value add. I do think that as women, we do have a slightly different perspective. Now, it might not always fit with the norms of the world, but our responsibility is to actually challenge the norms of the world, identify different ways of looking at the world, and ultimately contributing in a world that is a bit more empathetic to the notions of difference. The last thing I'm going to say is that I hope that we become better at this as women. I think that there was someone who put it in the chat box. I think that we still haven't become as good or as let's say understanding as women on how we can support each other. And I think men are much better at that. And how do we overcome whatever esoteric barriers we might have in enabling us to do that? I, for one, have taken it upon myself to remind myself of all the women that have been instrumental along my way and trajectory of life, starting, from my mom to my sister to my aunts, and then professionally. And it is my duty, and I call it out, and you can all be my witness, of trying to challenge myself to at least every day find a way to support a female colleague in my team, a female beneficiary. Not that I am differentiating from my commitment to my male, of course, beneficiaries and colleagues. It's just that there are differentiated challenges, and I think we all need to contribute in one way or another to the betterment of this female leadership world in a way that is impactful and meaningful.
Thank you, Joanne. And I would agree. I think there is still so much more that we need to do before we are, where we need to be. So I think having a voice and really helping others and pushing others up is critically important. So we have another question from Enrica. What does it mean when you share power? I think it's a very interesting question. Would men share power and still see it as power? Esther, should I hand it over to you, as you were the first one?
I knew that was coming to me. That's a very, very, very good question. Maybe we need to rethink this phrase. Maybe we need to rethink the sharing of power. So when I mentioned it, I was thinking about less so than the hard and soft powers, right? So someone mentioned about, it's the control, and actually, why would we want to share that kind of power? So it's not so much that, it's more the informal power, okay? The informal power, which is, for example, the power of tenure. So, you've been in someone who's been in the organization for a long time, and they've got all the networks and the loyalties and the friends behind closed doors and so on, or someone who holds a certain status in the organization. That informal covert power is what I'm talking about. So I think there's something around that maybe needs to come up to the surface, because we throw this word around, but actually there are definitions, right? And I think maybe what kind of power are we talking about? So that's a very valid question. So what does it mean to share it? I think there's something around creating the space, okay? Creating the space for others to lead, and sharing that platform. We've talked about voice and how important, equal voice, making sure that voices are heard, voices of women are heard, and that it's recognized, what we're bringing to the table, and that when women are in leadership positions, trusting and supporting, women to do the job that they can they're very capable of doing. Why, the second guessing, the interruption, the going behind back doors that I have seen, not all the time, but sometimes, is that, we're in positions of authority. Let's do the thing. So I think in terms of sharing, that's what I would be referring to. And then I would question just about the whole phrase, right? About power. We've used shift, we've used share. What is it? Maybe it needs to be a reimagined power or a reframe power. Maybe we need to claim a little bit of that phrase back for our sector.
Thanks, Esther. I'd love the reframe of power, because there is already, a bias to the word power, right? So I think we have one more question from the audience, from Mariana. Do you have suggestions of international organizations that are more open to Global South candidates? Ourania, can I hand that to you? Do you have any suggestions?
I think that we are all experiencing a meaningful desire of all organizations in our sector to significantly diversify their talent pool, which is fantastic. I do think that it would be nice for organizations to work together versus competing against each other on how to figure this out. I don't think there is a one size fits all, and I don't think there is one international organization that comes to my mind in terms of setting the gold standard. I think what we are recognizing is that this needs to be a true notion of partnership where organizations openly share practices that they may have found useful and support each other in this journey and effort. But I'm very happy to be seeing this momentum, so long as it doesn't become a momentum of check the boxes. And that's what concerns me, to ensure that we actually do it meaningfully, that we actually create the infrastructure and the ecosystem in our recruitment practices to be able to attract diverse talent, but also to ensure that we also work within our organizations to ensure that we can sustain and enrich diverse talent, because it's not just about attracting, it's also about making sure that we understand the differentiated ways in which that talent needs to be recognized, diversified, understood, and grown. So the answer is I can't think of one, but I can think of so many that are working towards this effort, ourselves included. And I think there is sincerity and authenticity in that, in recognizing that you haven't figured it all out, but in being vulnerable enough to open yourself up to the insights of others in order to become better at it.
Thanks. Joanne, do you like to add something?
Yeah, yes, thanks, Julie. And Rania actually spoke a little bit about that towards the end of your response, because I think it's difficult to name an organization that's more open or friendly to candidates from the South. But speaking as someone from Africa, really, I think that we have a role we can play, really, in actually making them more open to us. So I would say, what's my contribution and what can I do about it? And the one thing I can do is keep knocking and keep asking, keep sending in those applications and keep showing up in those spaces. And because then that makes institutions which might not be as open and welcoming to real meaningful diversity and inclusion sort of ask themselves and check into their organizational conscience. And then that should then trigger the more meaningful change that we've just heard about, that really changes and shifts not just what's written on paper, but organizational culture to really be meaningfully welcoming and receptive of diversity. So we also need to keep on pushing and pushing if we're actually going to expand these boundaries and get over the barriers. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks. And we are into the last 5 minutes. Time flies when you're having fun. So I'd like to go to the final question for all three of you. And please make it short because we're running out of time. But finally, what important advice or recommendation can you share to help others build a successful career in fundraising or general leadership in the nonprofit sector? Esther, I start with you.
So very briefly, I would say, if you are looking to build a career in this sector, actually look away. Every now and again, look outside of fundraising and look outside of the sector. Go and learn something different. Bring it back, whether it's how things are done elsewhere in other places and spaces. Look at how things are evolving elsewhere outside of what we currently do, because I think some of the challenges that we're facing in the sector today, to a degree, are because we've been in this bubble and this silo of non-profit, and whether it's debates around how you diversify your income or innovation or decolonizing aid, we need to challenge existing mechanisms, structures, systems, and our ways of working. So you can bring something new to have different conversations, expand your pool, expand your network, and look beyond, look outside.
Thanks, Esther. It is always good to look beyond.
Yes.
And I think with having this conversation and some of the people that have joined from outside of the sector, I see there's also interest. So Ourania, some advice for you for help people to build a successful career.
for me, three things: be yourself, be brave, and be silly. And let me talk about be silly. Not everyone will get you, but those people that will be critical in your life will. And the whole point of life is to actually be surrounded by the people that get you, celebrate you, and will go the extra mile for you.
Fabulous. I love silly. And Joanne, from your perspective, what do you want to share with the audience?
Julie, I see it as really investing more in myself, but investing not in terms of qualifications or experience, but in the soft things. We talked about soft power. How do you grow your own soft power, but grow it very deliberately? Your networks, who are your social networks? What's your professional ecosystem like? Because I think your contacts and your networks are one great asset. So it's actually about increasing your potential, shall I say, your net worth professionally, but not by accumulating papers and years of experience only, but really by the soft things that really grow your influence and make you a more influencing and more influential leader. So grow yourself, especially your soft skills and your soft assets.
Great. And I also think it is sharing is for me a big thing, right? have the video recording of it, so we can share that with others who were not able to come. And I really, wish you well. Ourania,